The final whistle had barely echoed through the stadium when two 6-year-old boys slipped past security and sprinted onto the pitch, laughing as thousands of fans gasped in surprise. Before anyone could stop them, Elijah flicked the ball over Caleb's head. Caleb caught it with his chest, then sent it back with a perfect volley. Even the players stopped to watch. Then Korea's greatest football star looked up. His smile faded. Those boys had his exact green-gold eyes. For a long, breathless second, nobody moved. The twins grinned at the man they had dreamed of meeting their whole lives, completely unaware that he had never known they existed. Unaware he was their Fuza. Then their mum, Jennifer, hurried onto the field, her heart pounding as she reached for her sons. The moment Do-hyun saw her, the world around him disappeared. The noisy stadium, the cheering fans, the flashing lights, everything faded into silence. The quiet waitress from that little club near Hongdae, the woman he had searched for in his memories for 7 years, standing before him, holding the hands of two little boys who shared his eyes, his face, his blood. "Jennifer," he whispered, his voice breaking. The cameras zoomed in, commentators fell silent. 60,000 fans rose to their feet as whispers swept across the stadium like wildfire. Then Caleb tugged gently on his mother's sleeve. "Mum, why is he looking at us like that?" Jennifer opened her mouth, but no words came. If that innocent question broke your heart, wait until you discover the heartbreaking truth about why Kang Do-hyun never knew his sons existed, and why these little boys believed he chose to abandon them. Subscribe now, we are about to begin. Seoul at night looked like a city that never wanted to sleep. Lights climbed every tower, and somewhere in the middle of all that shine, Kang Do-hyun signed his name across a boy's jersey and smiled the smile that magazines paid to photograph. He was Korea's captain, Korea's golden foot, the man every young player wanted to become. He loved every bit of it, the noise, the flashing cameras, the way his name got chanted like a prayer. Nothing about his life felt heavy, not yet. That same week, a magazine ran a full page asking when Korea's most eligible bachelor would finally settle down. His agency wanted an answer ready before the next press conference. His mother wanted a wedding before the year ended. Do-hyun wanted neither, though he never said that part out loud. He simply smiled at the question whenever it came, said something about focusing on football, and let the cameras move on to someone else. His mother, Han Soo-jin, ran his career the way some women run a household, with quiet control hidden under warm smiles. She had raised him alone after his father left when he was a boy, and every decision she made since had one goal stitched into it: protect her son from ever being left behind the way she once was. She loved him fiercely. She also trusted very few people near him, and trusted love the least of all. "There is a designer's daughter joining the gala on Friday," she told him over dinner one evening, sliding a folder across the table like a business proposal. "Her family owns half the department stores in Gangnam. She is lovely, and she understands what your image needs." Do-hyun pushed the folder back gently. "I already know what my image needs, mother. It needs me to keep scoring goals." Soo-jin's smile thinned, though she said nothing more that night. She had learned patience over the years, the kind that waited quietly for the right moment to push again. 7 years earlier, before any of that noise existed, Do-hyun was just a tired young player with promise and no money. His coach pushed him hard, his mother pushed him harder, and some nights, the only escape he had was a quiet club near Hongdae where nobody asked him for autographs. That was where he first saw her. Jennifer Boateng moved between tables with a tray balanced on one hand, laughing at something a customer said, her accent carrying the soft rhythm of two languages folded into one voice. She was born in Seoul, raised on kimchi and jollof rice in the same kitchen, and she had learned early that people would always stare before they spoke. She had stopped letting it bruise her. Do-hyun watched her from a corner booth, and when she finally came to take his order, he forgot what he wanted to drink. She laughed at his silence, not unkindly, and told him to breathe before he fainted. That was the first time he heard her laugh up close. It stayed with him longer than it should have. They talked until the club nearly emptied. She told him about the fashion sketches hidden in her bag, drawings she made between shifts because school fees would not pay for themselves. He told her about the weight of expectation sitting on his shoulders like a second body. Neither of them planned for it to matter, but it did. Weeks passed in stolen hours, quiet dinners, walks along the river when nobody recognized his face yet. It was simple and warm and real, the kind of thing neither of them tried to name. Then his coach called him into an office one afternoon and told him his life was about to change forever. The national team wanted him. Sponsors wanted him. A whirlwind swallowed his calendar overnight. Training camps, stacked on media days, stacked on flights to cities he had never seen. His phone number changed twice within a month. Messages piled up unread in accounts he no longer checked. He told himself he would call her once things settled. Things never settled. Jennifer waited. She sent a message through his old teammate, then another, then stopped trying when the silence began to feel like an answer. She was 3 months along by then, sitting alone in a clinic waiting room, staring at a small screen showing 2 flickering heartbeats instead of 1. She cried once, in her car, parked outside her apartment, engine off, hands gripping the wheel like it could hold her together. Then she wiped her face, walked inside, and decided that whatever happened next, her children would never grow up watching their mother wait for a man who never called. 6 years passed, the same way water wears a path through stone, slow and steady, and impossible to notice day by day. His manager at the time, a sharp man named Instructor Bay, had once received a message meant for Do-hyun during that first chaotic month of camps and interviews. He read it, decided it was a distraction his rising client could not afford, and quietly let it disappear into a folder nobody opened again. He never mentioned it to anyone. He told himself it was protection. He never once thought of it as theft. 7 years folded quietly into 6, into today. Jennifer built a small design studio above a fabric shop, her hands stained with thread and dye, her reputation growing one careful stitch at a time. She raised her boys with patience, sharpened by exhaustion, and love thick enough to fill every gap where a father should have stood. Elijah and Caleb were loud, in the best way, 6 years old, and already arguing about which position mattered more on a football pitch. Elijah liked to defend his opinions with his whole chest. Caleb preferred quiet jokes that landed right when you least expected them. Together, they turned every hallway into a stadium. Their mornings followed the same rhythm, cereal bowls clinking, socks searched for under couches, Jennifer buttoning 2 identical shirts while checking the clock on the wall. The boys never stopped talking about football long enough to notice her tired eyes some mornings, and she never let them see how tired those eyes actually were. Money stayed tight most months. The studio brought in enough for rent and school shoes, rarely more, and Jennifer had learned to stretch every one until it thinned like fabric pulled too far. Her landlord, a kind but firm old woman named Mrs. O, sometimes let the rent slide a week without saying much, though her eyes always carried a question Jennifer chose not to answer. 2 growing boys eat like small giants, Mrs. O said one afternoon, watching Elijah and Caleb race down the stairwell with a ball between them. Their father must be very tall. Jennifer only smiled and changed the subject, the way she always did, folding the comment away with all the others she had collected over 6 years of careful, practiced silence. Neighbors sometimes paused a second too long when they looked at the twins. A teacher once mentioned, gently, that their eyes were an unusual shade of green, almost gold in sunlight, nothing like Jennifer's deep brown. Jennifer would smile, change the subject, and feel something tighten quietly behind her ribs each time. One rainy afternoon, while searching for an old fabric sample in a storage box, Elijah found something else instead. A photograph, slightly curled at the edges, showing a much younger Jennifer laughing beside a boy in a academy jersey. Caleb leaned over his shoulder, both of them going still at the same moment. "Mum, who is this?" Elijah asked, holding the photograph up like evidence in a courtroom. Jennifer's hands froze over the fabric she was folding. For a second, the room felt smaller than it actually was. She took the photo gently, studied it, as though she had never seen it before. though she had kept it hidden for years without ever throwing it away. "Just someone I knew a long time ago," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. The boys were not satisfied with just someone. Caleb tilted his head, comparing the boy in the photograph to something on the television across the room, where a football match replay was playing quietly. His eyes went wide first, then Elijah's followed the same path. "That's him," Caleb whispered, pointing at the screen where Kang Do-hyun celebrated a goal, arms spread wide, the crowd roaring behind him. "Mom, that's Kang Do-hyun. Why do you have his old picture?" Jennifer felt her pulse climb into her throat. She had spent 6 years keeping this exact moment locked far away from her sons, and now it stood in her living room, holding a curled photograph like undeniable proof. "It's not him," she said quickly, too quickly. The boys exchanged a look only twins seem able to share, a silent conversation passing between them in half a second. They did not argue with her that night, but something had shifted, and Jennifer could feel it settle into the corners of the apartment like dust that refused to be swept away. Jennifer's studio sat above a fabric shop owned by a man named Mr. Han, who let her rent the narrow upstairs room for less than it was worth because he liked watching her turn plain cotton into something people wanted to wear. Her biggest client that season was a small boutique preparing for a spring collection, and Jennifer had spent weeks sketching patterns late into the night after the boys went to sleep. The boutique owner, a brisk woman named Ye-rim, arrived that same week for a fitting, flipping through Jennifer's sketchbook with sharp, appraising eyes. "These are good," she said, tapping a page showing a coat with a soft, draped collar. "Better than good. Where did you study?" "I never finished," Jennifer admitted, the old embarrassment rising briefly before she pushed it down. Life happened faster than school did. Ye-rim studied her for a moment, something unreadable crossing her face. "Life has a habit of doing that," she said simply, and moved on to discussing fabric samples, leaving Jennifer strangely comforted by the small, unexpected understanding in those words. Over the following days, Elijah and Caleb became detectives without announcing it. They studied Do-hyun's face on posters at the corner store, on the side of a passing bus, on the screensaver of their friend's tablet. They compared his eyes to their own in the bathroom mirror, standing on their toes to see clearly. "Same color," Elijah announced one evening, holding a mirror up next to a magazine cover. Caleb nodded slowly, his 6-year-old mind working through something far too large for his age, yet somehow arriving at the truth anyway. At school, their teacher assigned a small project about family trees, asking each child to draw the people who loved them. Elijah drew his mother first, tall and smiling, then paused for a long moment before adding a second figure at the edge of the page, a tall man in a jersey with the number 9 stitched across his chest, though he left the face blank because he was not sure yet what expression to give it. Caleb drew something different. He drew a football pitch with 3 small figures standing on it, his mother in the middle, himself on one side, his brother on the other, and far across the grass, a 4th figure standing alone, too far away to reach. When the teacher asked him to explain it, he only shrugged and said, "He is still walking toward us." The teacher mentioned it gently to Jennifer at pickup that afternoon, meaning nothing unkind by it, simply passing along something she found touching. Jennifer thanked her, folded the drawing carefully into her bag, and cried quietly in the car before starting the engine, the way she had learned to do without the boys ever noticing in the rearview mirror. "Mom," Caleb said at dinner, poking at his rice instead of eating it, "is Kang Do-hyun our dad?" The question landed in the kitchen like a dropped plate. Jennifer set down her spoon carefully, buying herself a few seconds she desperately needed. She had imagined this conversation 100 times in her head, yet none of those imagined versions prepared her for how young and how certain her son's voice sounded. "Why would you think that?" she asked, keeping her tone light even as her chest tightened. "Because we have his eyes," Elijah answered simply, as if the logic could not be clearer, "and you have his picture, and you get sad when his name is on TV. Children notice more than adults expect." Jennifer had spent years believing she hid her feelings well, folding them beneath cheerful mornings and busy hands. But her sons had been watching her the whole time, quietly gathering pieces she thought were invisible. She did not answer that night. She tucked them into bed, kissed both foreheads, and sat alone in the dark kitchen afterward, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of a truth she was no longer sure she could keep folded away much longer. The following morning, the boys asked again, this time with more courage. They wanted to meet him, not someday, not maybe, but soon, with the kind of certainty only children carry before the world teaches them patience. Jennifer's answer came out sharper than she intended. "No," she said, and the word cut the room into silence. She saw the hurt flicker across both small faces and immediately regretted the sharpness, though not the decision behind it. "But we deserve to know him," Elijah said quietly, his voice small but unwavering. Caleb nodded beside him, his usual jokes nowhere to be found. Jennifer knelt down to their level, took both their hands, and tried to explain without giving away everything at once. "It's complicated," she said, and even to her own ears, the words sounded like an excuse rather than a reason. "Everything is complicated," Caleb replied, surprising her with the seriousness in his tone. "But we still want to try." Days passed with the question hanging over every meal, every bedtime, every quiet drive to school. The boys did not shout or cry about it. They simply kept asking, gently, persistently, the way water eventually wears down stone. At school pickup one afternoon, another mother leaned toward Jennifer with the practiced casualness of someone who had been waiting weeks for an opening. "The twins were telling my daughter their father plays football for the national team," she said, smiling too wide. "How exciting for them!" Jennifer's stomach dropped. She had not realized the boys were already telling classmates a story she herself had not confirmed. "Children say all sorts of things," she answered carefully, forcing a light laugh that felt heavier than it sounded. That evening, she sat both boys down at the kitchen table, her voice gentler than she felt inside. "You cannot tell people things we are not sure about," she said. "Not yet. But we are sure," Elijah said, crossing his arms with the stubbornness of a much older child. "We just need you to be sure too." Jennifer had no answer for that. She only reached across the table and pulled both of them into a hug, holding on a second longer than usual, as though the embrace itself could postpone whatever was coming. Across the city that same week, Do-hyun stood inside a bright studio for a shoe brand shoot, cameras flashing while a stylist adjusted his collar for the 5th time. His current manager, a younger woman named Yu-mi who had replaced instructor Bae the year before, checked her tablet between takes, reading out his schedule in a flat, efficient voice. "Charity Gala Thursday, Sports Network interview Friday morning, National Team Training Camp begins Saturday," she said, not looking up. "And your mother wants you at the Choi family dinner on Sunday. The daughter will be there again." Do-hyun rolled his shoulders under the studio lights, tired in a way training never made him feel. "Tell my mother I have training on Sunday." "You do not have training on Sunday." "I will find some." Yumi almost smiled, catching herself before it reached her lips. She had worked for him long enough to recognize the difference between his real laughter and the practiced one he gave to cameras, and lately she noticed the real one showing up less and less, though she never mentioned it, and he never seemed to notice it missing either. A family friend named Grace, who worked behind the scenes for a sports broadcasting company, called Jennifer one evening with news that felt like fate deciding to interfere. There was a youth fan event connected to an upcoming national team match, tickets available through her work, front row access to the pitch after the game. "I am not doing this," Jennifer said immediately, pacing her small kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear. "I am not asking you to do anything except let them stand near a football pitch," Grace answered patiently. "You do not have to speak to him. You do not have to explain anything. Just let them have this one afternoon." At the national team training ground that same evening, Do-hyun stayed behind after practice, striking free kicks alone into an empty net long after his teammates had showered and gone home. His closest teammate, a midfielder named Ji-hoon, leaned against the fence and watched for a while before finally speaking. "You have scored the same goal 40 times tonight," Ji-hoon said, arms crossed. "What are you actually practicing?" Do-hyun did not answer right away, lining up another shot instead. "Nothing," he said finally, striking the ball harder than necessary. Just staying sharp. Ji-hoon studied him a moment longer, the way old friends do when they sense something shifting beneath a familiar surface. You have been staying sharp for 2 weeks straight, he said. Even for you, that is a lot of sharp. Do-hyun said nothing, retrieving the ball himself instead of waiting for the machine to reset, and Ji-hoon eventually let the silence stand, though the question stayed with him long after he walked away, unanswered and strangely heavy for something so simple. Jennifer stared out her window at the lights of the city, thinking of 2 boys who had learned to compare their eyes to a stranger's photograph, thinking of years spent protecting them from a truth they were already circling closer to every single day. That night, she watched Elijah and Caleb sleeping, tangled together the way they always ended up despite having separate beds, and something in her chest finally gave way. Protecting them from disappointment was one thing. Protecting them from the truth felt like something else entirely. The next morning, over breakfast, she told them yes. 2 spoons clattered against 2 bowls at the exact same moment, and for a second, the kitchen filled with the kind of noise only pure joy could make. "We get to go to a real match," Elijah shouted, jumping so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. "Are we going to meet him?" Caleb asked, quieter, more careful with his hope than his brother. "We are going to watch a match," Jennifer said firmly, holding up one finger like a warning. "That is all, nothing more." But even as she said it, she felt the shape of something bigger waiting just beyond her control, something she had spent 7 years keeping locked away, that was now walking straight toward daylight, whether she was ready or not. The days leading up to the match moved strangely, slow in the mornings and fast at night, as if time itself could not decide how nervous to be. Jennifer found herself standing in front of her closet longer than usual, then scolding herself for caring what she wore to watch a football match she did not even want to attend. Elijah and Caleb, meanwhile, treated the entire week like the countdown to a holiday. They practiced their own goal celebrations in the living room, copying Do-hyun's signature pose from videos they found online. Arms wide, chin lifted, chests puffed out with pride, neither of them fully understood the weight of yet. On Thursday, the twins convinced Jennifer to let them wear their jerseys to school a full 3 days early, arguing that practice was necessary for such an important event. Elijah insisted on learning every player's name on the starting lineup, reciting them at the dinner table like a chant. Caleb spent an entire afternoon teaching himself a new trick with the ball, determined to show it off if the chance ever came. "Do you think he will notice us?" Caleb asked one evening, sitting cross-legged on the rug with a worn football tucked under one arm. "He notices everyone," Elijah answered confidently, though nothing in his voice suggested he actually knew that for certain. Jennifer, listening from the kitchen doorway, felt her throat tighten at how easily her sons trusted a stranger they had never met. On Wednesday evening, Jennifer stayed up long after the twins fell asleep, sitting at her sewing table without actually sewing anything, the photograph from the storage box propped against a spool of thread. She traced the edge of it with one finger, remembering a laugh she had spent years trying to forget, and hating how easily it still lived somewhere close to the surface. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Grace confirming the gate number and arrival time. Jennifer typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too, and finally sent a short message that said only, "We will be there." She did not sleep well that night. Neither, though she did not know it, did he, 3 neighborhoods away, staring at his own ceiling for reasons he could not name. Grace called twice more that week, checking details, offering reassurance Jennifer did not ask for, but quietly needed. "You do not have to make any decisions today," Grace told her during the second call. "Just show up. Let the day happen the way it happens." Jennifer laughed without much humor in it. "Nothing about this feels like just showing up," she said, staring at the 2 small jerseys she had ironed and hung by the door. Jerseys the boys had begged for weeks ago, without knowing whose name might soon mean everything to them. Do-hyun woke that same morning, feeling strangely unsettled, a restlessness he blamed on nerves before an important match, though something about the feeling sat differently in his chest than ordinary nerves ever did. He ran through his usual routine anyway, stretching, checking his boots, reviewing set pieces with his coach, pushing the odd heaviness aside with the discipline of a man who had trained his whole life to ignore distraction. His mother called just before he left for the stadium. "Score for the cameras today," she said, only half joking. "The Choi family will be watching." "I always play for the fans, Mother," he answered, and hung up before she could add anything else, the conversation leaving behind a small, familiar ache he chose not to examine. The morning of the match arrived grey and cool, the kind of sky that could not decide between rain and sunshine. Jennifer dressed the twins in matching jackets, brushed down hair that refused to stay flat, and stood at the mirror longer than she meant to, before finally grabbing her keys. "Mum, you look nice," Elijah said, tugging at her sleeve as they walked toward the car. "I look normal," Jennifer replied, though something in her chest fluttered at the compliment anyway, a small, foolish flicker of feeling she quickly pushed back down where it belonged. The stadium came into view long before they reached it, towering and bright even under a cloudy sky. Banners of players stretched across the outer walls. Do-hyun's face loomed largest among them, confident and unreadable, staring out at a city that adored him, without knowing what waited quietly in a small car pulling into the parking lot below. "That's him," Caleb whispered, pressing his face against the window glass, eyes wide with a kind of wonder that made Jennifer's heart ache in a way she had not expected. Inside, the noise hit them first, a rising wall of sound made of chants and vendors and thousands of footsteps moving toward the same destination. Elijah gripped Jennifer's hand tightly, suddenly quieter than he had been all week, overwhelmed by the size of the crowd around him. Grace met them near the family entrance, waving them through a gate reserved for guests connected to the broadcasting team. "You are earlier than most," she said, guiding them toward seats close enough to the pitch that the players below looked almost real instead of like distant figures on a screen. Jennifer settled the boys into their seats, checked their jackets, adjusted the small scarves someone at the gate had handed them for free, all while trying to ignore the way her pulse refused to slow down. She told herself this was simple. She told herself this was nothing more than an afternoon out for her sons. She did not believe herself even a little. The players walked onto the pitch for warm-up, small figures at first, jogging in loose lines, stretching, calling to each other across the grass. Then one figure separated from the rest, moving with a familiar ease that struck Jennifer somewhere deep and unguarded before she could brace herself against it. Do-hyun looked exactly like his posters, yet somehow more solid, more real, more human than any photograph had ever managed to capture. He laughed at something a teammate said, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of one hand, and for a brief second turned toward the stands, where thousands of strangers watched him like he belonged to all of them. Jennifer's chest tightened painfully. 7 years had passed, yet her body remembered him faster than her mind wanted to allow. She looked away quickly, focusing instead on the boys beside her, who were both leaning forward in their seats, eyes locked on the same man, without knowing yet what that man meant to them. "He's really tall," Elijah said, awestruck, and despite everything twisting inside her, Jennifer almost smiled. The match began with a roar that shook the stands. Do-hyun moved across the pitch like the game belonged entirely to him, quick, precise, confident, in a way that made even Jennifer, distracted and anxious, briefly forget why she had spent 7 years avoiding exactly this sight. In the 20th minute, a defender caught him hard across the ankle, and the whole stadium gasped as he went down on the grass, rolling once before pushing himself back up. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth without permission, her body reacting before her mind could remind her that she had no right to worry about him anymore. Elijah grabbed her arm, eyes wide with alarm. "Is he hurt?" Elijah asked, voice small over the noise of the crowd. "He is fine," Jennifer answered quickly, watching Do-hyun jog it off with a wave to the medical staff, relief loosening something tight in her own chest before she could stop it from happening. Caleb, meanwhile, had noticed something else entirely. "Mom, you were scared," he said, studying her face with the uncomfortable accuracy only a child possesses. Jennifer opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again, choosing instead to focus very hard on the game unfolding below. Near the halfway mark, Do-hyun's phone buzzed twice in the locker room tunnel during a stoppage, a message from his mother reminding him the Choi family was watching from a private box 3 sections over. He did not reply. Something about the noise of the crowd that day felt different to him, though he could not explain why. A restlessness sitting under his ribs that no goal so far had managed to shake loose. Halftime came and went in a blur of snacks and questions from the twins, both of them recounting every pass and near miss with the seriousness of professional commentators. Jennifer nodded along, answering when she could, her mind circling constantly back to the second half still waiting ahead. The second half opened with tension thick enough to feel in the air. The score stayed close, both teams pressing hard, the crowd rising and falling with every near chance. Then, in the 73rd minute, Do-hyun received the ball near the edge of the box, turned once, and struck it clean into the top corner. The stadium exploded. Elijah and Caleb jumped to their feet, screaming along with 60,000 strangers, arms raised in the exact celebration pose they had practiced all week in their living room. Jennifer stood too, clapping automatically, her heart pounding for reasons that had little to do with football. As the final whistle blew, the stadium staff began preparing the pitch for the tradition Grace had promised, the moment when selected young fans were allowed to walk onto the grass and stand near the players for a few precious minutes. Jennifer's stomach dropped the second she remembered this part of the plan. "Mum, is it our turn?" Caleb asked, tugging at her sleeve, eyes bright with an excitement that made refusing impossible. Grace appeared beside them, smiling, gesturing toward the gate leading onto the pitch. "This way," she said cheerfully, completely unaware of the storm quietly building behind Jennifer's carefully calm expression. The boys ran ahead before Jennifer could stop them, small figures weaving between security staff and other excited children, laughing, breathless, thrilled beyond words. Jennifer followed quickly, heart hammering, calling their names, though the noise of the crowd swallowed her voice whole. Elijah reached the grass first, immediately dropping into a stance mimicking the players he had watched all afternoon. Caleb joined him seconds later, and together they began kicking a stray ball between them with a skill that drew surprised glances from nearby staff members. Then the whispers started. A cameraman near the sideline turned his lens toward the twins almost by instinct, drawn by their obvious talent, their matching energy, something about the shape of their faces that tugged at attention without explanation. Commentators in the broadcast booth paused mid-sentence, exchanging glances neither of them understood yet. Jennifer reached the pitch just as Do-hyun, still catching his breath from the match, turned toward the small crowd of children gathering near midfield. His eyes swept across them briefly, polite, distracted, until they landed on 2 boys with unmistakable green-gold eyes staring straight back at him. Time seemed to slow the moment their gazes locked. Do-hyun froze mid-step, his easy post-match smile faltering for the first time all evening. Something about those eyes struck a memory buried deep beneath 7 years of trophies and headlines, a memory he had never fully allowed himself to examine. Jennifer stepped onto the grass then, moving quickly toward her sons, her heartbeat roaring louder than the fading crowd noise around her. She reached Elijah first, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder, and it was at that exact moment Do-hyun's attention shifted from the boys to the woman standing behind them. Their eyes met. The stadium noise blurred into something distant and unimportant. Do-hyun's breath caught somewhere in his chest, memory crashing into recognition with a force that nearly knocked the air out of him entirely. The club near Hongdae. The laughter that steadied his nervous hands, the face he had not seen in 7 long years, standing right in front of him now, holding the hands of 2 boys with his own eyes staring out from their small faces. His lips parted, though no sound came out. Jennifer felt the exact moment recognition hit him, watched confusion shift into something closer to disbelief, and understood immediately that whatever careful plan she had built around this day had just collapsed entirely in a single silent second. A teammate called Do-hyun's name from a few steps away, asking if he was ready for the post-match interview, waiting near the tunnel. He did not answer. He could not seem to make his mouth work at all, his eyes still fixed on the woman standing between two small boys who shared his exact eyes, his exact stubborn jaw, his exact way of tilting their heads when they were curious about something. Jennifer felt every eye on the pitch slowly turning their way, felt the strange, heavy silence spreading outward from where they stood. A silence far louder than the noise that had filled the stadium only minutes before. She wanted to grab both boys and disappear through the nearest gate, yet her legs refused to move, rooted to the grass by the weight of Do-hyun's stare. "Jennifer," he said finally, her name leaving his mouth like something fragile he was afraid of breaking. It was the first time he had said it out loud in 7 years, and it landed between them heavier than either of them expected. Elijah looked up at his mother, then at the tall man staring at her with an expression neither boy had ever seen on a grown-up's face before. Something between shock and disbelief, and a grief too old for a stranger to be carrying. "Mom," Caleb whispered, tugging her sleeve. "Why is he looking at us like that?" Jennifer opened her mouth to answer, though no words came. Somewhere behind them, a stadium camera operator zoomed in tight on the three of them, standing frozen on the grass, unaware that within minutes, the footage would already be spreading across every sports channel and every phone screen in the country, carrying a question no headline writer would resist asking. Around them, cameras kept rolling, commentators kept whispering, and 60,000 fans slowly began to notice that something far bigger than a football match was unfolding right there on the grass. Security noticed the crowd's strange stillness before anyone said a word into a radio. 2 officers moved toward the small group at midfield, gentle but firm, guiding Jennifer and the boys toward the tunnel meant for guests. Do-hyun took 1 step after them, then stopped himself, aware of 100 cameras still pointed his way, aware that whatever he did next would live on a screen somewhere long after tonight ended. "Wait," he said, and his voice cracked in a way it never did during interviews. Jennifer did not turn around. She kept walking, 1 hand on each boy's shoulder, her spine straight, even as her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Elijah looked back once, confused by the sudden rush of adults around them, by the flashing lights, by his mother's grip tightening on his shoulder. "Mom, why are we leaving?" he asked. "We did not even get his autograph." "Not tonight," Jennifer said, her voice thinner than she wanted it to sound. Grace met them just inside the tunnel, her face pale, her phone already buzzing non-stop in her hand. "It is everywhere," she whispered, angling the screen away from the boys. "The clip is already everywhere." Jennifer did not look at the phone. She did not need to. She could feel the shape of the coming days pressing down on her already, heavy and inevitable, like weather she had no way to outrun. The drive home passed in near silence, the boys too confused to fill it with their usual chatter, Jennifer gripping the wheel with both hands, though the road ahead stayed empty and calm. Her own phone lit up again and again in the cup holder, name after name she did not recognize, until she finally reached over and turned it face down without checking a single one. Once home, she tucked the boys into bed earlier than usual, promising answers she was not yet ready to give. Caleb caught her wrist before she could leave the room. "Mom," he said quietly, "was that our dad?" Jennifer sat back down on the edge of the bed, took a slow breath, and finally let the truth she had held for 6 years step fully into the room. "Yes," she said, "that was your father." Neither boy cheered. They simply looked at each other, then back at her, absorbing the confirmation with a seriousness that made her chest ache. "Why did he look so surprised?" Elijah asked. "Did he not know about us?" Jennifer chose her next words carefully. "He did not," she said. "I tried to tell him a long time ago. Something got in the way." The boys fell asleep eventually, tangled together the way they always ended up, and Jennifer sat alone in the dark living room afterward, staring at her phone screen without touching it, waiting for a storm she already knew was coming. Mrs. O knocked on Jennifer's door that same morning, still in her house slippers, phone clutched in one hand, with the pitch footage paused mid-frame. "You never told me," she said, though her tone carried no accusation, only wonder. "All those years, and you carried this alone." "I did not know how to tell anyone," Jennifer admitted, standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. Mrs. O reached out and patted her arm gently. "Rent can wait this month," she said. "Whatever you need, you tell me." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her all week, and Jennifer had to close the door quickly before the tears came. Yerim called later that afternoon. Her usual brisk tone softened considerably. "The boutique owner wants to move your fitting to next week," she said. "Take the time you need. Your work will still be good work when you are ready for it." Jennifer thanked her, grateful for the small mercy of people choosing patience over curiosity, even as reporters continued to linger outside Mr. Han's shop, hoping for a comment she had no intention of giving. By morning, the story had grown legs of its own. Sports channels replayed the pitch footage on a loop, freezing on the moment Do-hyun's face shifted from confusion to something raw and unguarded. Commentators speculated. Entertainment shows built entire segments around a single blurry photograph pulled from someone's phone, and by noon, the words "twins" and "secret" and "striker" had climbed to the top of every trending list in the country. Yumi arrived at Do-hyun's apartment before he had even finished his coffee, laptop already open, her usual calm replaced by something close to panic. "The sponsors are calling every 10 minutes, she said, setting the laptop down hard enough to rattle the table. "The shoe brand wants a statement by tonight. Your mother wants you at the house within the hour." Do-hyun stared at the paused image on the screen, his own face frozen mid-recognition, Jennifer standing behind two small boys who shared his eyes exactly. "I am not giving a statement," he said quietly. "Not until I understand what happened." "You do not have the luxury of understanding right now," Yumi snapped, then caught herself, softening slightly at the look on his face. "I am sorry, but the world already decided this story without you. You need to decide how you respond to it." He closed the laptop himself this time. "Then I will respond by telling the truth," he said, "whatever that turns out to be." His mother's house sat behind a tall gate in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the noise downtown, though noise had clearly found its way there anyway. Reporters lingered near the entrance, held back by a private guard. Cameras raised the moment Do-hyun's car slowed to turn in. Soo-jin met him in the hallway before he even reached the living room, her face pale beneath careful makeup. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake," she said. "Tell me those children are not yours." Do-hyun looked at his mother steadily. "I do not know what they are yet," he said, "but I know their mother. I knew her 7 years ago, before any of this started." Soo-jin's hand pressed against her chest, as though steadying herself against a blow. 7 years, she repeated. "You never mentioned her." "There was nothing to mention," he said. "She disappeared. I assumed she simply moved on without me." Something flickered across his mother's face then, quick and difficult to name, gone before he could ask about it. "People do not simply disappear," she said carefully. "Not without a reason." Do-hyun studied her expression a moment longer than usual, an old unease stirring somewhere he could not yet place, though he pushed it aside for now, too overwhelmed by everything else crashing down around him to chase a feeling with no shape yet. Later that afternoon, he asked Grace for Jennifer's address, and Grace, torn between loyalty to her friend and sympathy for a man clearly drowning in confusion, finally gave it to him with a single warning. "Go gently," she said. "She has protected those boys alone for 6 years. Do not walk in there like you deserve anything yet." The apartment building sat modest and quiet on a narrow street, nothing like the towers Do-hyun usually called home. He stood outside the door for a long moment before knocking, rehearsing words that scattered the second Jennifer opened it and looked at him with an expression carrying equal parts exhaustion and defiance. "You should not be here," she said, though she did not close the door. "I know," he answered. "I came anyway." Jennifer glanced back into the apartment, checking that the boys were still occupied in the next room, then stepped outside and pulled the door mostly shut behind her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, arms crossed, voice low. "An explanation," he said. "I sent nothing. I heard nothing. And then suddenly there are 2 boys standing on a pitch with my eyes, and everyone expects me to already know what to do about it." Jennifer's laugh came out sharp and humorless. "You want an explanation," she said. "I called your old number for weeks. I left messages with your teammate. I even wrote a letter and gave it to someone from your training camp to pass along. Nothing ever came back, not a word." Do-hyun's jaw tightened. "I never received any of that," he said. "Not a call, not a letter, nothing." "Then where did it go?" Jennifer asked, her voice cracking slightly despite her effort to hold it steady. Neither of them had an answer yet, though the question settled between them heavy and unresolved, a thread neither was ready to pull just yet. The following morning, Do-hyun sat across from instructor Bae for the first time in nearly 6 years, having tracked him down through an old Federation contact, now working at a regional academy outside the city. Bae looked older, grayer, though his posture still carried the same confident authority Do-hyun remembered from his rookie season. "To what do I owe this visit?" Bae asked, pouring tea with steady hands. "A woman named Jennifer," Do-hyun said, watching closely. "She says she tried to reach me 7 years ago. Letters, calls, messages through my teammates. I never received any of it." Bae's hands did not shake, but something in his face went very still. "I do not know what you mean," he said. "You handled everything back then," Do-hyun pressed. "Every call, every message that came through the club. If something came in during that period, it would have passed through you first." The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Finally, Bae set down the teapot and folded his hands. "You were on the edge of something enormous," he said quietly. "A distraction like that could have cost you everything you worked for. I made a decision. I did not think you would ever need to know." Do-hyun stood so fast, his chair scraped hard against the floor. "You decided that for me," he said, voice shaking now with an anger he rarely allowed himself in front of anyone. "You took 7 years away from me. 7 years I can never get back." Bae did not apologize, not fully, though something in his eyes suggested he understood, perhaps for the first time, the true size of what he had done. Do-hyun left without another word, driving nowhere in particular for nearly an hour, the truth settling into him, slow and unbearable, heavier with every passing mile. He told his mother that evening, watching her face carefully as the story unfolded. Soo-jin's composure cracked halfway through, tears rising unexpectedly in eyes that rarely allowed them. "I did not know," she said. "I swear to you, I did not know he did that." "Would you have stopped him if you had?" Do-hyun asked quietly. His mother did not answer right away, and the pause told him more than any words could have. "I only ever wanted to protect you," she finally said. "The way no one protected me when your father left. I thought love was the danger. I never once considered that silence could be its own kind of harm." Do-hyun sat with her in the quiet living room a long while after that, neither speaking, both carrying the weight of a truth neither had asked for, but both would now have to live inside. The next morning, he called Jennifer, and though she hesitated, she agreed to let him see the boys, just once, just to talk. He arrived at a small park near her apartment, nervous, in a way 6 years of championship pressure had never made him feel. Elijah and Caleb approached slowly at first, studying him with the same careful curiosity they gave every stranger, though something in their posture suggested they already understood this stranger was different. "You're really tall," Caleb said, tilting his head back to look up at him. "You're really loud on television," Elijah added, arms crossed the exact same way Jennifer's often were. Do-hyun laughed despite himself, surprised by how quickly the sound came. "I get told that a lot," he said, crouching down to their height. "I heard you two are excellent footballers." "The best in our school," Elijah said proudly. "Second best," Caleb corrected. "I let him win sometimes." "You do not," Elijah shot back, and for a moment, watching them argue with easy affection, Do-hyun felt something in his chest loosen just slightly, a small, fragile warmth he had not expected to find so quickly. Jennifer watched from a bench nearby, arms crossed, guarded but no longer entirely closed off. She had spent years imagining this exact scene in 100 different versions, none of them quite matching the strange, tender awkwardness unfolding in front of her now. Over the following days, Do-hyun returned again and again, each visit a little longer than the last. He learned that Elijah liked to argue every point until he won, that Caleb preferred quiet observation before offering a joke that always landed sharper than expected. He learned their laughter, their small habits, the way they finished each other's sentences without seeming to notice they did it. The boys, in turn, tested him constantly, the way children test anything they are not yet ready to trust completely. They mimicked his goal celebration until he laughed along, then asked pointed questions that landed like small, precise blows. "Why didn't you come find us sooner?" Elijah asked one afternoon, kicking a ball against a low wall with more force than the question required. Do-hyun crouched beside him, choosing honesty over comfort. "I did not know you existed," he said. "If I had known, I promise you, nothing would have kept me away." "That's what everyone says," Caleb muttered from a few steps away, not looking up from the ball at his feet. The words landed harder than any tackle he had taken on the pitch. Do-hyun sat back on his heels, quiet for a long moment. "You are right to be angry," he finally said. "I missed 6 birthdays. I missed everything. Being angry about that makes sense, and I am not going to ask you to stop, just because it is uncomfortable for me." Elijah looked at him then, something shifting slightly behind his eyes, though he said nothing more that day. Caleb kept his gaze fixed on the ball, though his shoulders had eased just slightly, the smallest possible crack in a door that had been shut tightly for a long time. Jennifer, watching from the bench, felt her own guarded heart tremble at the sight. Torn between the instinct to protect her sons from further disappointment and the quiet hope that maybe, finally, someone had shown up willing to earn his place rather than simply claim it. A week after the press conference, the Choi family finally withdrew their interest altogether, a polite note arriving through Soo-jin explaining that their daughter had accepted another family's proposal. Soo-jin delivered the news to Do-hyun almost apologetically, expecting disappointment that never came. "Good," he said simply, and his mother studied him for a long moment before allowing herself a small, surprised laugh. "You never wanted that arrangement," she said. "Not once. Not from the beginning." "No," he admitted. "I only ever wanted someone I did not have to arrange feelings for." He did not say Jennifer's name, though his mother heard it anyway, folded quietly into the space between his words. The public storm around them did not calm easily. A gossip channel offered Jennifer money for an exclusive interview, which she refused without hesitation. A reporter camped outside her studio for 2 full days until Mr. Han finally chased him off with a broom, muttering about respectable businesses attracting the wrong kind of attention. Do-hyun's sponsors grew nervous enough that the shoe brand quietly paused their next campaign, waiting to see which direction public opinion would settle. His mother fielded calls from the Choi family, politely declining further dinner invitations without fully explaining why, a small act of protection Do-hyun did not learn about until much later. Then, 10 days after the match, Do-hyun called a press conference himself, against the advice of nearly everyone around him. Yumi warned him it was too soon. His mother warned him it could end his career. He walked into the room anyway, cameras flashing before he even reached the podium. "7 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life," he began, voice steady, despite the roaring silence in the room. "I did not know we had children together until 11 days ago. That is the truth, and I am not interested in managing it or softening it for anyone's comfort." The room stayed utterly silent as he continued, describing nothing of Jennifer's private life, offering no details she had not agreed to share, simply acknowledging his sons publicly and completely, without hedging, without spin. "Their names are Elijah and Caleb," he said. "They are 6 years old, they are brilliant, and they deserve far better than a father who only shows up once the cameras force his hand. I intend to be better than that, starting today." The clip spread even faster than the pitch footage had, though this time the tone shifted noticeably. Public sympathy, once split evenly between curiosity and judgment, tilted firmly toward admiration. Comment sections filled with support instead of speculation, and for the first time in 10 days, Jennifer's phone buzzed with messages that felt less like intrusion and more like quiet solidarity. She watched the press conference alone in her apartment, the boys already asleep, her hand pressed against her mouth as his voice carried through the small speaker on her phone. Something inside her, guarded fiercely for 6 long years, finally allowed itself to soften just slightly, though she was careful not to let it soften too far too fast. The following weeks settled into something resembling a rhythm. Do-hyun showed up for school pickups, drawing curious stares from other parents that gradually faded into ordinary familiarity. He attempted, badly, to braid Elijah's hair one morning when Jennifer ran late for a client meeting, producing a lopsided result that made both boys laugh until they nearly cried. "You are terrible at this," Caleb announced, watching his brother's uneven braid with open delight. "I am learning," Do-hyun said, unbothered, already reaching for a comb to try again. He trained with them in a small park near Jennifer's apartment most weekends, teaching them footwork drills far beyond their age level, listening with genuine attention as they explained, at great length, their opinions on every player currently on the national team. One Saturday, Elijah tried a trick he had seen in a video and fell flat on his back in the grass, staring up at the sky with wounded pride, until Do-hyun sat down beside him instead of pulling him up right away. "Even I fell on my face the first 100 times I tried that move," Do-hyun said, lying back in the grass next to him. Elijah turned his head, surprised. "The real trick is not caring how many times you fall, only whether you get up the 101st time." Caleb wandered over, flopping down on Do-hyun's other side without being asked, and for a while the three of them simply lay in the grass together, watching clouds drift over the park, saying nothing at all, the silence comfortable in a way none of them had expected it to become so quickly. Slowly, carefully, Jennifer allowed herself to be present during these moments rather than watching from a careful distance. She noticed the steadiness in how he showed up, week after week, without needing applause for it, without treating it as a performance for anyone watching. One afternoon, Jennifer allowed Do-hyun to walk her home from the boutique after a long fitting session, both of them tired, the conversation easy in a way it had not been since those early nights near Hongdae 7 years earlier. He carried her sample bag without being asked, adjusting his pace to match hers without comment. "You still walk like you are late for something," he said, glancing sideways at her. "I have been late for something for 6 years," she answered, though a small smile pulled at her mouth despite herself. They stopped at a crossing, waiting for the light, close enough that she caught the familiar warmth of him beside her, close enough that neither moved away when the light changed and they simply stood there a second longer than necessary before finally crossing. "I am not asking you to forget anything," he said quietly. "I just want the chance to become someone worth remembering differently." Jennifer looked at him, really looked, past the fame and the posters and the 7 years of silence, and found underneath it all the same steady warmth she had once trusted without hesitation. She did not answer with words. She simply let her hand brush his as they crossed the street, the smallest possible gesture, though it carried the weight of a door easing open rather than slamming shut. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, following a long afternoon at the park, Do-hyun lingered a little longer than usual on Jennifer's small balcony. The city lights spread out below them in quiet, scattered patterns. "I looked for you," he said suddenly, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortably between them. "After everything settled down, back then, I looked, for a while." Jennifer turned to face him, surprised. "You never told me that." "I did not know how to," he admitted. "By the time I looked, you had already changed your number. I told myself it meant you had moved on, that maybe it was easier that way." "Nothing about it was easier," Jennifer said quietly, her voice carrying 7 years of exhaustion folded into a handful of words. "I built an entire life around convincing myself I did not need you to come back." "Did it work?" he asked, voice low. Jennifer looked out at the city instead of at him, considering the question honestly for the first time in a long while. "Some days," she said. "Most days, I was too tired to feel anything except getting through until morning." Do-hyun stepped a little closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, despite the cool night air. "I cannot give you back those 7 years," he said, "but I am not interested in wasting the ones still ahead of us." Jennifer's breath caught slightly, her guarded heart pulling in two directions at once. Want and caution tangled together in a way she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She did not step back. She also did not step closer. Not yet, though something in the space between them felt charged with a possibility neither of them said out loud. "Good night, Do-hyun," she finally said, though her voice carried a softness that had not been there the night he first knocked on her door. He smiled, small and real, nothing like the practiced version cameras usually captured. "Good night, Jennifer," he answered, and left without pushing for anything more than that, exactly the kind of restraint she had not realized she needed from him until he offered it freely. Weeks turned into months. Instructor Bae's actions eventually became public knowledge through a sports journalist's investigation, and though Do-hyun never sought public sympathy for it, the story added a layer of understanding that softened even the harshest early critics. Bae quietly left his position at the academy, and Do-hyun, though still angry, chose not to pursue anything further, deciding his energy belonged elsewhere now. Soo-jin, humbled by her own complicity in the silence surrounding her son's stolen years, made slow, deliberate efforts toward Jennifer, starting with a handwritten note delivered through Grace, then a quiet visit one afternoon that ended, not in forgiveness exactly, but in something close enough to begin building from. "I was wrong to assume love was something to guard against," Soo-jin told Jennifer during that visit, sitting stiffly at the small kitchen table. "I see now that the greater danger was never love itself, it was silence." Jennifer studied the older woman for a long moment, seeing beneath the polish something raw and regretful. "The boys need grandparents who show up," she finally said. "Not perfect ones, just present ones." Soo-jin nodded, something loosening in her shoulders for the first time since the scandal broke. "Then I intend to show up," she said simply, and though the road ahead of them remained far from smooth, it was, for the first time, a road they were willing to walk together. On the boy's 7th birthday, Do-hyun arrived before sunrise with 2 matching bicycles and a cake he had insisted on baking himself, despite Jennifer's warnings that he had never baked anything in his life. The cake came out slightly lopsided, one side sunken lower than the other, and the boys declared it the best cake they had ever tasted, laughing until Jennifer had to wipe her own eyes with the back of her hand. "You said you would make up every birthday," Caleb reminded him between bites, pointing his fork for emphasis. "I am starting exactly where I promised," Do-hyun answered, watching both boys tear into gifts with matching excitement, the sunken cake sitting proudly at the center of the table like a small, imperfect monument to everything they had rebuilt together. Jennifer stood in the kitchen doorway watching the three of them, flour still dusted across Do-hyun's sleeve from the disastrous baking attempt, laughter filling a home that had once felt too quiet for the size of the love inside it. She thought, not for the first time, that some repairs did not need to be perfect to be real, only patient, only consistent, only present, the way this one finally, fully was. Elijah and Caleb's forgiveness came slower than anyone expected, and neither Do-hyun nor Jennifer rushed it. There were setbacks, days when the boys pulled back suddenly, remembering old hurt without warning, days when Do-hyun had to sit quietly with their anger instead of trying to fix it too quickly. One evening, months into the new rhythm they had built, Caleb finally said the words that changed everything. They were sitting on the living room floor, boxes of old photographs scattered between them, Do-hyun helping the boys build a small album of memories neither of them had known existed until recently. "I used to think you left because we weren't good enough," Caleb said quietly, not looking up from the photograph in his hands. "That maybe if we were better at football you would have come sooner." Do-hyun set down the album immediately, kneeling in front of his son with a seriousness he rarely allowed himself in front of the boys. "You were always enough," he said, voice thick. "You were enough before I even knew your names. What happened was never about you. It was about grown-ups making terrible mistakes that had nothing to do with your worth." Elijah, listening from across the room, finally spoke the words neither boy had offered before. "We forgive you," he said simply, the kind of forgiveness only a child could offer, complete and without conditions attached. "But you still have a lot of birthdays to make up for." Do-hyun laughed through the sudden tightness in his throat, pulling both boys into a hug that lasted far longer than any of them expected. "I intend to make up every single one," he said, starting with the next one. At training one afternoon, Ji-hoon caught Do-hyun humming to himself while lacing up his boots, something he had never once seen the man do in 5 years of playing beside him. "Whatever you were staying sharp for," Ji-hoon said, dropping onto the bench nearby, "it looks like you finally found it." Do-hyun glanced up, a small, easy smile crossing his face, without any effort at all. "I did not find it," he said. "It found me. I just had to stop being too distracted to notice it, standing right in front of me." Ji-hoon shook his head, laughing quietly. "7 years of silence and you still talk like a poet, instead of a striker," he said, though the warmth in his voice made it clear he meant it as a compliment. Around the same time, Jennifer sat across from Grace, in a quiet cafe near the studio, turning a cup of tea slowly in her hands, without drinking it. "I keep waiting for the part where it falls apart," she admitted. 6 years of expecting disappointment does not disappear just because he shows up on time now. Grace reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Maybe it never fully disappears," she said gently. "Maybe you just learn to let the good days outweigh the fear, one at a time, until one day you look up and realize the fear got quieter than the joy." Jennifer considered that for a long moment, watching steam rise from her untouched tea. "I want to believe that," she said finally. "Then believe it a little at a time," Grace answered. "That is usually how the biggest things get believed." Nearly a year after the match that changed everything, the 4 of them stood together at a smaller, quieter stadium event, a charity match organized for children without access to proper football training. Elijah and Caleb ran drills alongside Do-hyun, their laughter rising bright over the sound of the crowd, ordinary now, no longer the subject of whispered speculation, but simply a family enjoying an afternoon together. Jennifer watched from the sideline, Grace beside her, Soo-jin a few seats down, engaged in an animated conversation with another grandmother about the boys' rapid improvement. The scene held none of the chaos from that first match, only warmth, steady and earned, built slowly over months of showing up rather than a single dramatic gesture. Do-hyun jogged over during a break, breathless, grinning in a way that reminded Jennifer of the boy she had once met in a quiet soul club, though this version of him carried something steadier now, something shaped by loss and learning rather than untested confidence. "They asked if you would walk onto the pitch with them for the closing ceremony," he said, nodding toward the boys, who were watching from a distance with matching hopeful expressions. Jennifer hesitated only a moment before nodding, allowing herself to be pulled toward the grass she had once fled across in fear, walking this time instead toward something that finally felt like home. As the 4 of them stood together under the stadium lights, Elijah reached for Do-hyun's hand on one side and Jennifer's on the other, completing a small, unremarkable circle that had taken 7 years, 1 accidental reunion, and countless quiet choices to finally form. The crowd applauded gently, unaware of the full story behind the family standing at midfield, though a few sharp-eyed fans recognized the twins from months ago and smiled knowingly at how far things had come. Jennifer looked up at Do-hyun, and for the first time since that night on the pitch, she let herself smile, without guarding it, without measuring how much of herself she was allowed to give. He looked back at her the same way, something unspoken passing between them, steady and certain in a way it had never been 7 years ago, when neither of them had known enough yet to hold on to something this fragile and this real. A stadium worker approached quietly, asking if the family would allow one final photograph for the charity's records. Jennifer hesitated only a moment before nodding, and as the small camera clicked, she felt Do-hyun's hand find hers, not gripping, not demanding, simply present, the way steady things eventually learn to be. Grace, watching from the sideline with Soo-jin beside her, wiped at her eyes and pretended it was the wind. Soo-jin said nothing at all, though her hand reached for Grace's arm, the same way Jennifer's had once reached for a steering wheel in an empty parking lot, holding on to something that finally, after everything, no longer needed holding together by force. The boys, still holding both their parents' hands, glanced at each other with matching grins, silently agreeing, without a single word, that whatever forgiveness still remained to be given, it could wait a little longer, because right now, standing together under bright stadium lights with the whole complicated, hard-won family finally in one place, nothing else needed saying at all. Later that night, long after the crowds had gone home and the stadium lights had dimmed one by one, Jennifer stood at her own window, watching the city breathe below her, Elijah and Caleb asleep in the next room, exhausted and happy, in a way she had once feared they might never fully get to feel. Her phone buzzed once with a message from Do-hyun, simple and unhurried, the way all his messages had become over the months. "Thank you for letting me become someone worth remembering differently," it read. And Jennifer stood there a long moment, phone pressed lightly against her chest, feeling 7 years of guarded silence finally settle into something that no longer ached quite the same way. Outside, the city kept moving the way it always had, indifferent to the small, enormous victory unfolding quietly in one modest apartment, 2 boys sleeping soundly, with their father's laughter still echoing somewhere in their dreams, and a mother finally allowing herself to believe that some stories, however delayed, however painful in the waiting, still find their way home in the end.